The question was asked, can you throw a football jig on a spinning rod? Well, the answer is yes, but should you? No. Can you throw a Ned rig on a baitcaster? Well, the answer is yes, but should you? No. Okay, can you throw a glide bait on a spinning rod? Well, of course the answer is yes, but should you? No, you shouldn't. Why? Let's talk about it. Well, how's it going, everybody, and welcome back to Tyler's Reel Fishing. My name, as you heard there, is Tyler. I love to teach you guys how to become better bass anglers, and that's my goal on this entire channel. Entertainment is there, fish catching is there, but of course my main goal is to help you guys understand fishing better and catch more and bigger fish. So if you're not subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button, join Team TRF down below, and let's get started into the content. So the title and thumbnail of this video is going to be something about matching your bait to your rod and reel in terms of bait casting versus spinning rods. That is the two, I believe it's really the only two rod types. I guess you have like a spin caster with a button, like a Zebco 33. But when it comes to bass fishing, you really only have two options for types of rods. You got a spinning rod and you have a bait casting rod. And I see so many people out there, especially younger anglers, throwing lures on either a baitcaster or a spinning rod that just flat out cannot or don't deserve to be thrown on that kind of rod and reel. And you may look at this topic and say, you're overthinking it. I can throw whatever lure I want on whatever rod I want, and you can't tell me otherwise. And sure, go for it. Knock your lights out. But I'm just telling you from experience what I know to be true, and that is, it matters what type of rod you are throwing when you're throwing certain types of lures. So I said a few in the intro there, but just to name a few: giant glide bait, tiny popper, 6XD, quarter-round slipless crankbait. These lures here are very specialized to what types of rods they have to be thrown on. And so I'm gonna kind of go through a little checklist here, 4 or 5 points of why I think you should throw certain lures on a baitcaster and why you should throw certain lures on a spinning rod. And of course, that means that you're gonna have to have several of each. Bass fishing can tend to be an expensive sport or expensive hobby, whatever you want to call it, but it doesn't have to be. You don't have to have 74 rods like I have laid out on your boat deck. You can just have 4 or 5, and that will get you by almost every single scenario when it comes to bass fishing. But of course, you shouldn't be throwing super heavy lures on a spinning rod, and you shouldn't be throwing super light, tiny lures on a baitcaster, because that just doesn't work. And let me explain why. Step number 1 when it comes to matching your lure to your rod and reel is going to be looking at the rod itself. Now, every rod is printed with the specifications of what the rod is meant for and what the rod is not meant for. And so here I have my Lew's TP1 Black Speed Stick. This is a bait casting rod. It is a jerk bait special. It says it right down there on the bottom: top water jerk bait. Now, by top water, it doesn't mean frog, it means little popper. But when it comes to this rod, I can read the specs. It is a 6 foot 8 inch, which at least for bass rods is around average, maybe a little bit smaller than average for nowadays. The power is medium, the action is moderate fast, the line weight is 8 to 12 pound, and the lure weight is 1/8 ounce to 1/2 ounce. Now, of course, you can stray from those, but that is the recommendations that Lew's has given for this rod. This rod is going to function best if you're throwing lures that are between an 1/8 ounce and a 1/2 ounce, and you're throwing line pound tests that's between 8 pound and 12 pound. I'm going to be making a video in the next few months about the differences between medium heavy, moderate fast, extra fast, all those types of rod types. But this video is just about how to match your lure to your rod. So that's tip number 1, is you have to look at the rod itself. Now, if we contrast this rod here, this baitcaster, to this spinning rod, you're going to find that these are actually just about the same. So this is a 6/8 medium baitcaster. This spinning rod is an all-purpose spinning rod. It is a 7 foot medium, fast action, the line weight being 6 to 14 pound, and the lure weight being 3/16 to 5/8. So this spinning rod, is actually rated for a little bit heavier line and heavier lures than this baitcaster is. But they both fall in about the same category to throw light lures. But if I'm gonna compare this spinning rod here, the 7 foot medium, to this baitcaster, you may not think they look all that much different. But if you read the specs on this baitcaster, this is a flippin' stick. It is 7'4", heavy, fast action, with the line weight being 15 to 65 pound, and the lure weight being 3/16 ounce to 1 1/2 ounce. Comparatively, this is 6 to 14 pound line. So the highest pound test you probably should throw at this Of course, you can, go a little above or below if you want. The highest pound they recommend is not even the lowest pound they recommend for this rod. So as you guys can see, rods vary greatly when it comes to the types of line you should throw on them and the weights of lures that are recommended for those types of rods. And so that's step number one, is you want to make sure you understand what that rod means by the action, the power, and of course the line size and weight size. And it's going to be kind of a feel thing. If you are trying to cast a heavy lure on your spinning rod and it just feels like it's too heavy, it probably is. And if you have a bait caster, you're trying to throw a little hair jig and you're having trouble getting distance and accuracy, it's probably too small of a lure for that rod. Step number two to matching your bait to your rod is going to be understanding what line size you have. Heavier lures put more strain on your line, and bigger fish put more strain on your line. So if you're throwing a spinning rod, I see people all the time that have like 65-pound braid on their spinning rods. And I'm not talking about like offshore saltwater stuff. That's okay to have heavy line. But I see people that have 20 to 30-pound monofilament on their spinning rods, and they're casting at 15 feet and thinking that that's about how far something casts. But if you understand that a spinning rod is meant for a very, very thin diameter line, this 15-pound braid is literally thinner than my 8-pound fluorocarbon. Like 15 to 8. The 15 is thinner. Spinning rods are meant for a thin diameter line. Bait casting rods are meant for, of course, any lines that are bigger than a spinning rod is meant to handle, up to 65, 80-pound braid. Anything above 80-pound braid, or about 40, 50-pound fluorocarbon, it just doesn't cast through the guides. The guides are too small for that. And so you have to understand what your line size is. If I want to throw this big swim bait right here, I cannot throw this on 10-pound fluorocarbon. It just cannot handle the constant heaving it out there, because one of these times it's going to snap off, not because my line is frayed, but because 10-pound fluorocarbon, 10-pound mono, whatever, 15-pound braid is not meant to withstand how heavy this lure is. And just like throwing this little popper right here, I love throwing this popper on 15 or 20-pound braid on a spinning rod because it's so small and it's so light. I've tried throwing this popper on a baitcaster, and it's almost impossible. Because the baitcaster, the only one that would really work is this little topwater rod here, the 6/8 medium, and I prefer to throw an even bigger popper like this Strike King KVD popper, because I feel like I get better distance and accuracy with a baitcaster over a spinning rod. But with this tiny little popper, I just can't throw it on a baitcaster. It's almost impossible. And so do not get out there and tire yourself out trying to throw a light lure on a baitcaster or a super heavy lure on a spinning rod and wondering, why can't I get distance? Or why is it casting really far and I can't get a good hook set? It's because you're not using the right line size. All these steps here are going to be correlated to one another. Rod, weight, lure type, line size, they're all interconnected. So I'm gonna try to piece this together as best as I can. But you have to understand what line you're throwing, because you don't wanna break off on a hook set and you don't wanna have an issue with casting it far enough. Tip number 3 for picking your lures for a baitcaster versus a spinning rod is going to be understanding how much your lure weighs. Now, I think we've talked about this a little bit before in the first 2 steps, and really everything here is kind of interconnected. Line size, weight, rod power, everything's interconnected. So I'm gonna kind of cover each topic in every step, but your weight is very important of your lure. So if I go back to the flipping stick here, the 7.4 heavy, the lure weight is meant for a 3/16 to a 1.5 ounce. And so this 1/2 ounce flipping jig, Outcast Cage Fighter jig, fits perfectly within that range, between 3/16 and 1.5 ounce. Can you get away with something a little bit, lighter or a little bit heavier than the rod recommends? Yes, you can. But I would recommend getting anywhere from 4 to 7 rods if you want to take bass fishing seriously, that you can carry around with you in the car or in the boat, that cover the whole range of any weight lure that you're going to want to throw. So weight is really important, and going along with weight is the type of hook that is in there. So this is kind of tip 3.5. With a flipping jig, as you guys can see here, I've got a thick wire hook. This hook is going to take a little bit of oomph, a little bit of strength to set the hook into the fish's mouth because the diameter is thick. And so that's why I'm throwing a thicker line size and a heavier action rod. Now, if I'm throwing this jerkbait here, first off, you have like 9 hooks, so it doesn't take that much to hook the fish, and also the hooks are a thinner diameter. So when you go to jerking on the fish or on the jerkbait, and then you go to jerk it and you have a fish on, that one jerk is all you need to set the hook because the hook diameter is thin enough. And so that's another thing to understand, is that maybe you're throwing a football jig, maybe you're trying to throw maybe a regular jig like the Outcast juice jig right here. This is a standard jig. It can be thrown on a baitcaster or a spinning rod. I prefer baitcaster, of course, because spinning rod has trouble setting the hook. Most spinning rods are not heavy enough to really, unless you absolutely rail on them, to set the hook into the fish's mouth. That's where the Baitcaster comes into play, at least for me, on most jigs. So you have to understand not just the weight of the lure, but the type of hook that it has. There's jigs out there that have very thin wire hooks. Like this jig here, this jig head on the Outcast Tackle GoldenEye swim bait, that's a very, very thin hook. So sure, it still technically is a jig head, but it is not the same jig head as a flipping jig. Very, very different. You have to understand how heavy your hook is, and so what type of rod you're going to need and what type of line you're going to need. And the last tip that I have, number 4, for picking your lures for a baitcaster versus a spinning rod is going to be what you are fishing. If you're fishing in thick, heavy vegetation, throwing a spinning rod is going to be difficult because a spinning rod's components are, at least a bass spinning rod, offshore ones are a little bit different, but a bass spinning rod is not meant to set the hook really hard and just go to cranking and pulling a fish out of lily pads, out of hydrilla milfoil. They're just not meant for that. They are meant for setting the hook in open water and fighting a fish to the boat. A baitcaster like this flipping stick, the 7-4 Heavy, this thing is literally meant for ripping fish out from underneath docks, heavy cover, an offshore brush pile, rock pile, that kind of stuff, whereas a spinning rod is not meant for that. And so you have to put thought into, what am I going to be fishing today? If I'm flipping around trees, I probably shouldn't be throwing a spinning rod. Vice versa, if I'm throwing a drop shot on offshore rock piles for smallmouth bass, a baitcaster is probably not the best option for that. And if you are fishing around some shallow brush or shallow grass, you've got to put the line size, like we talked about earlier, as well as the lure weight into consideration. So if you're trying to punch, you're going to need a heavy weight to get through the grass, but because the weight is heavy, you're going to need a heavier rod and a heavier line size to make up for the fact that the weight is heavy. So that's where this 65-pound braid comes into punching. If you're throwing a drop shot, you want the lure to fall straight and quickly. And so you don't want any resistance on the line through the water, so a thin line diameter, like a 15 or 20 pound braid, and an 8 or 10 pound fluorocarbon is gonna be perfect for that. You can't just willy-nilly bring a bunch of rods with you to the lake, rig up whatever you want on them and expect to catch fish, because you're gonna have difficulties if you're not understanding what type of stuff you're fishing and how to match your rods, reels, line, and weight to those specific situations. Like I mentioned before, I don't wanna make fishing too complicated. The purpose of this channel is to teach you guys skills that can immediately make you better bass anglers, and so this is just one thing that I thought was confusing to people. The way that you select your lures and pick your lures can be difficult, especially if you only have 1 or 2 rods. So if that's the case, I understand. You may have to go way outside of the lure weight recommendations, line recommendations that your rod says when you only have a few rods, but as you build up your arsenal, start to get different rods that can apply to different things. Get a crankbait rod, like a 7-foot, 7.2 medium that can be used for crankbaits. 1 or 2 spinning rods, one for more shaky heads, Ned rigs, one for drop shots and small swim baits. You know, you want to diversify your rod and reel arsenal so that you are covering all of your bases, because bass fishing is a very diverse sport. There's so many different ways to catch fish and different situations to put your lures, and I would hate for you guys to be throwing the right lure in the right place, but you don't have the rod and reel combo to get the fish back in the boat. So hopefully all this stuff made sense to y'all. Please leave any comments you have or questions down in the comment section below. I want that to be an open forum for discussion between myself and you guys, and between you guys as subscribers to each other. If you guys are not subscribed to TRF, make sure you guys do that. I will have a few of my Minnesota videos where I caught some big old bass linked below, and we'll see you guys next time on TRF.